Hello, Happy Valley. Do you recognize this painting? Most of you might not know who the artist is or the name of this painting, but you have probably seen it sometime in your lifetime. Now, this was painted by Vincent Van Gogh, and the name of it is called The Starry Night. If you knew the answer to that, then I would ask you, what else do you know about his life? Most likely you're going to say things like the cutting off of his ear, sunflower paintings. You might mention the fact that he only sold one painting in his lifetime, or you might even mention his mental illness or the fact that he ultimately took his life. However, there's so much more to the man and the artist than those things. So today's video is going to be an introduction to who Vincent van Gogh was, what he did during his lifetime, and ultimately what caused him to end his life. Let's get started. Vincent van Gogh was born March 30th, 1853. Now I have a little story to tell you. He was the oldest of six, but Vincent wasn't born the first Vincent. In fact, Vincent was born exactly 1 year after his parents' first son, also named Vincent. Now, he was born stillborn. He was born March 30th, 1852. A stillborn child is a child that is born dead. So exactly 1 year from the date, the Vincent van Gogh that we know was born. Exactly on the same day, just 1 year later. So March 30th, 1853, the artist Vincent van Gogh was born. Isn't that a little eerie? Very eerie start to life. Having your name and birthday etched on your deceased brother's gravestone. Now, if you look at the image up on the right-hand side, you can see a little bit of a glass area right there. And that's where the former house of Vincent van Gogh's childhood was. Now, it's gone. It was too dilapidated to preserve, but the city folk of Zundert, Netherlands, they decided to commemorate where he was born, and they put that plaque there, that glass plaque, to show that that was his childhood home. The photo to the left is a picture of Vincent when he was about 13 years old. Now, his father was a preacher and his mother was a housewife. And Vincent wrote a lot in a diary, and he described his mother as smothering her children. I think maybe she had some psychological problems since her first child was born stillborn. And obviously she must have some kind of an issue to recycle the name and use it on her living son, Vincent. But it was understood that he had exhibited unstable moods during his childhood. Now, the place that he's from, in Zundert, Netherlands, they have a festival that they do every year. And in 2015, they did the festival in honor of Vincent van Gogh. Now, these are floats made by the people of Zundert. And Zundert is known for producing lots of flowers. So these floats are made entirely out of flowers. They're quite interesting. Now, if the real Vincent van Gogh were still alive and he was able to see this parade, he would just be mortified because he was a very reserved person and he didn't like a lot of attention. This one's one of my favorites. It's very Vincent van Gogh, very eerie, very bizarre. Of course, I love this one because it's my favorite color, purple. At the age of 16, Vincent quit his formal education to work in an art gallery selling art, and he worked there for over 9 years. Now, his brother, Theo, it looks like it's Theo, but it's pronounced Theo, was also an art dealer and did exactly the same thing that Vincent did. So to be an art dealer, Vincent had to move, and he traveled constantly throughout the Netherlands, Paris, London, Belgium. He bounced around these places. So he was a very nomadic person. Nomadic meaning he moved around a lot. He was also nomadic when it came to finding a career. Now, he did sell art for 9 years of his life, but that wasn't what his passion was. So he tried other areas. He tried to pursue other careers. At one point, he was a school teacher. He tried to follow in his father's footsteps and become a preacher. He worked in a bookstore. And it really wasn't until the age of 27 that he finally settled on being an artist. Now, during this time, an artist would have gone to art school and studied and really delved themselves into art. Vincent never did that. He was 100% self-taught. Now, most of what we know about Vincent van Gogh comes from letters that he wrote to his brother Theo. They had a lifelong friendship, and they communicated through hundreds and hundreds of letters. Now, Theo kept many of Vincent's letters, in fact, about 600. But Vincent, on the other hand, only kept about 40 of his brothers. But in Vincent's letters to his brother, it was more of a diary. He wrote a lot of details. He drew pictures, and he showed examples of his ideas, and he worked those out with his brother Theo. So on the bottom right-hand side is a picture of Vincent, and the top left is a picture, opposite. Bottom right is a picture of Theo, top left is a picture of Vincent. Entirely different times, though. So Vincent's early work, I want you to really notice the colors that he uses, or the palette that he uses, and you'll notice a difference. Very dark, dreary colors. And Vincent was a very poor artist. In fact, he never sold a painting, or he sold one painting in his lifetime. So he really depended on his brother Theo to help support him his entire life. He also couldn't afford certain paints. Different colors, depending on what color you were working with, were expensive. In fact, the color red is one of the most expensive colors to purchase, even today. So you had to work with these darker, drearier colors. He also lived in poverty, and he did a series of paintings of peasants. These are very different than the painting I showed you in the very beginning of the Starry Night. This is why I want you to see that this is Vincent's early work. Now, he would send these paintings to his brother Theo, who was still an art dealer, and he would ask him to sell his paintings. Now, Theo tried, but this wasn't what people wanted to have in their homes and hang on their walls. And in fact, Vincent one time accused his brother of not selling his paintings at all, and that wasn't it. It's just that nobody wanted something like this. Now, this is the Potato Eaters, painted in 1885, and this is considered one of Vincent's first masterpieces. Vincent did a series of sunflowers. In fact, he did 2 series of sunflowers. And I want you to notice this is the first series. Look at how the sunflowers are being painted. Are they in a vase? No. Are they full of life? No. The first series, you can tell the difference between the first and the second is because the first series, these are almost deceased or dying sunflowers. They have practically no petals on them. They're laying on the ground. They're not in a vase. Now, Vincent, again, moved around a lot, even as an artist. Now, he primarily stayed in Paris, but he did move around Paris. And his brother suggested that maybe he move to the city of Paris, where a lot of artists at the time were meeting and learning from each other. And so he actually moved to the city, and he befriended other artists of the time, like a man named Paul Gauguin, which is spelled Gaugin, and another artist named Henry Toulouse-Lautrec. Seurat, other Impressionist and Post-Impressionist artists of the time. Vincent painted about 43 self-portraits in his entire collection. All of these are from the time he was living in Paris. They are all similar because they're Vincent, but yet they have differences in paint colors or the way he applied the paint. And you can see here that Vincent was experimenting. He was speaking to these other artists and learning from them and trying new things. He was exploring the unlimited possibilities that paint can offer. He was trying to find his own mark. During this time, there was a drink called absinthe, sometimes referred to as the Green Fairy. You can see that over in the bottom left-hand side, Le Fée Verte. I probably butchered that, don't tell Mr. Edwards. But this is a painting also in the top right-hand side of, it's called the Absinthe Drinkers. So this is a very popular drink during the time, and in fact is actually illegal to have in the United States. The United States has their own version, and on the box you can see a picture of Vincent Van Gogh, and it looks very trippy or dreamlike. And that's because the actual drink is supposed to make you hallucinate, and it makes you see different things. They call it the fairy, the green fairy. It's green in color, and then it makes you hallucinate and see things. And this was a popular drink that Vincent and other artists partook in. Now Vincent was very poor, and so he also didn't have a lot of money to eat, so he would smoke cigarettes. And that's why this painting here in the very beginning, this is sometimes called to as a self-portrait of Vincent, because he was skin and bones. He was wasting away. And he would drink absinthe and smoke cigarettes. So he didn't get a very good nutritious diet in him. And he was just, probably hangry a lot. Now, while he is in Paris, Vincent starts trying something he calls night effects. He wants to paint the night. He wants to paint the stars. And this is his first attempt at what he called night effects. This is not the Starry Night, but this is called Starry Night over the Rhone. Now, Vincent, absolutely enjoyed his time in Paris. And here's another famous painting. You've maybe seen this one, and this is called Café Terre at night. Again, he was focusing on night. He wanted to get these deep dark blue colors and these rich yellow gold-like hues from the lights. And this cafe still exists today. So over on the right-hand side are some pictures of it, the bottom one from night, and the top one is during the day. It still looks pretty much the same as it did even in 1888. Here are some of Van Gogh's second series of sunflowers, way different from the first series. Let's remind you. The first series, these sunflowers were dead or decaying. They had very little petals on them. They weren't even in vases. And here we've become a little bit more cheery, brighter. They're in vases. They're flourishing. And this is his second series of sunflowers. Now, of course, Vincent becomes tired of Paris, and he decides that he wants to explore a different area, and so he wants to go to the countryside of France. And he has this dream. He's going to start an art colony, a brotherhood of artists, all living and working together. And so he rents this yellow house, and when I say he rents it, I mean his brother Theo pays for it. And he has this dream of all of these famous artists that he met in the city of Paris to come live in this home with him and paint and embrace the countryside and just develop their looks and their art. But he's only able to convince one artist to move with him, and that is his friend Paul Gauguin. So he hopes that when Paul Gauguin moves, that the rest of the other artists will hear about how much fun they were having and how their art was developing, and they would all move out there. That didn't happen. In fact, Gauguin and Van Gogh, they lived together for about 9 weeks, and then the ear incident happens. Now, the exact sequence of events that led to Van Gogh mutilating his own ear is really unknown. We have Gauguin's story, and we have bits and pieces of Vincent's. But what basically happened is that Gauguin, he was finding it really difficult to live with Vincent. Again, Vincent isn't having a good diet. He's smoking cigarettes still and drinking absinthe. In fact, also, he's probably eating paint. Sometimes people say that he was eating paint. I don't think he was eating it as if it were food. I think there would be paint on the end of his brush, and he would stick it in his mouth. Now, paints that were made in the 1880s are way different than the way paints are made today. Back in the 1880s, paints would have been made out of all kinds of minerals, and some of them were very toxic and bad for you. So he's sticking this paint in his mouth, and when you work with oil paints, you also work with terpenoid, which is a chemical. So this kind of stuff is getting in his system, and it's very toxic. So it probably was adding to his manic moments and his crazy little moments. But anyway, it was becoming very difficult to live with him. And Gauguin also felt as if Theo, Vincent's older brother, and Vincent were using him. They thought they were using him to pay the rent or to help take care of Vincent. And he just didn't want to be here anymore. Now, Vincent, on the other hand, felt like he didn't want Gauguin to leave him. He was scared of being alone because he knew that he could not survive on his own. And he could feel that Gauguin was getting ready to leave, that he was going to walk away. And so instead of talking to Gauguin nicely about it, Vincent got enraged. And Gauguin decided it was best to maybe walk away and leave. So he was going to go on a walk and kind of cool down. But Vincent wasn't done, and he followed out into the street, and he had a straight razor with him, which is an old way of shaving. And he sticks the razor in Gauguin's face, and the two men are staring at each other for a few seconds. And then it's as if Vincent has a moment of clarity, and he realizes, what am I doing? What am I going to do? Am I going to cut my friend? So he just turns around and he walks back into the yellow house. Now that is according to Gauguin. Gauguin says he walked away. And that's the end of Gauguin's story. Now, according to Vincent, he returned back to his room where he was assaulted by voices. So he starts to hear things. And he severs his ear in the process. What I think happens is that he heard these voices. He's holding the razor in his hand, and he's probably swinging the razor at the voices, and he ends up nicking his ear. And when you're very upset sometimes, and something happens all of a sudden, it catches your attention for a minute. And I bet he nicked his ear just a little bit, and in his manic moment, he cut it off. To make matters worse, he then takes his ear and he wraps it up and he brings it to a woman. Her name was Rachel. And Rachel was a prostitute. Artists at the time would pay prostitutes to model for them because they were cheaper than paying for a model. And Vincent liked this girl. Her name was Rachel. And so he thought, I'll bring her this gift. I know this does not make any sense, but when you're having a bad moment, a mental breakdown, not a lot makes sense. So again, Vincent says that he has no recollection of the events at all. He had a mental breakdown. He wasn't present at the time. But anyway, he wraps this ear up and he brings it to Rachel. Well, you can imagine Rachel gets this wrapped up, who knows what it is, and she unwraps it and realizes it's an ear, and she screams, which this only scares Vincent. So he turns around and he runs back to the yellow house, and he goes up into his room, and he probably passes out, most likely from so much blood loss. Now, this is a painting that Gauguin did of Vincent van Gogh when they were living in this countryside together. You can see Vincent painting some flowers. And here's another one of the same hangout, same bar. The top right hand is Vincent van Gogh, and the bottom is Gauguin's. Very similar yet different. Of course, this is what happened the night of the ear incident. This is from a local paper. And it said, last Sunday at 11:30 in the evening, Vincent van Gogh, a painter of Dutch origin, called at the brothel number 1, which is a prostitute house, asked for a woman called Rachel, and handed her his ear, saying, "Guard this object with your life." He then disappeared. When informed of the actions, which could only be that of a pitiful madman, the police went the next day to his house and discovered him lying on his bed, apparently at the point of death. The unfortunate man has been rushed to hospital. Now, this is a painting that Van Gogh created 2 weeks after the incident, and it shows his right ear bandaged, but it was his left ear that was actually bandaged, because this is a mirror image. Now, Vincent, after the whole incident, he did live in the yellow house a little bit longer. Of course, Paul Gauguin was long gone. But he was later driven out by the police because of a petition. So at the time, if 30 of your neighbors signed a petition that said you were insane or said you were crazy or you were a bad influence for the area, that the police would actually ask you to leave. And that's what happened to Vincent. Now, he was convinced to go to an asylum to get some help. So he moved in to this asylum. So the bottom left-hand side is the asylum that was in the French countryside. And it's here that he painted the most famous painting of all, the Starry Night. And now you would think he maybe, looked at this and then drew it, but he actually made this all up in his head. So he probably took a scene from a city, and then it was the night sky that he saw out of his window at the asylum, and that's what inspired this painting. Well, also in the asylum, he painted this painting called The Irises, which is up at the very top. Now, again, Vincent never sold a painting or only sold one painting in his lifetime. But after his death, Irises sold for a record $53.9 million. Vincent would just probably roll over in his grave if he knew how much money one of his paintings sold for. And he stayed in this asylum for about a year, and then he was released, and he went back out, and he moved in to this, he rented a tiny little room at this house, and this is where he spent the last 2 months of his life. Now, on July 27th, 1890, Vincent van Gogh went out to paint like he normally did, but this time he took a loaded pistol. And he would go to this little farm area where there was a lot of wheat and hay, and he shot himself in the chest. But in true Vincent van Gogh pitiful life, the bullet did not kill him. It actually just punctured him. So, of course, he only put one bullet in the pistol, so he didn't get a second chance. And he grabbed his belongings and headed back to the house where he rented the room. And he walked up to his room, And of course, he was found bleeding in his room. And the people that found him, they called a nearby doctor, and the doctor was sent out. And they could not remove the bullet. So they phoned his brother Teo, and Teo came out to see Vincent. And when Teo arrived, he found his brother sitting up in his bed and smoking a pipe. And they spent the next couple of days talking together. And Van Gogh asked his brother if he would take him home, but that never happened. On July 29th of 1890, Vincent van Gogh died in the arms of his brother. He was only 37 years old. And this is thought to be one of Vincent's last paintings. The art historians aren't really unsure, but it's of the wheat field that he would go frequent. Now his brother, who was suffering from an illness, and then he was weakened by Vincent's death, died 6 months after Vincent. They were buried next to each other. Now it's been suggested that Van Gogh suffered from bipolar disorder. He had extreme happy moods to really, really sad moods and depressed moods. But there wasn't any knowledge of this disorder, nor were there any way to help people that were suffering from bipolar disorder. So we'll never really know if that's what he had, but it's suggested that that's what was wrong with him. This is called the Red Vineyard. And this is Vincent's only painting that he sold. And Vincent painted over 2,000 artworks, but he only sold one while he was alive. And he sold it for nothing, for 400 francs. Which would be a lot then. It's approximately $3,500 today. But think about that. He painted for 10 years, and the only money he ever made was $3,500. He died thinking he was incompetent, thinking he was a nobody. Now both of these paintings are portraits of the doctor, Gauchet. This is the doctor who took care of Vincent in his last months when he was staying at the asylum. And both paintings are from the same time, but they're very different, both in color and the style that they're painted in. The one on the left sold for $82.5 million in 1990. So today that would be about $154 million. It's just unimaginable, the value that art can create. There's so many cool things about Vincent that have happened in our culture, and that's why I want to show you some of these really neat things. So in 2016, the Art Institute in Chicago created an installation, and that's a art with inside of a building. Okay, and what they did is they took a painting by Vincent van Gogh over here on the left hand side called The Bedroom, and they recreated it, made it look realistic, and they put it on Airbnb so you could rent it. And their title was, "I'm charging $10 a night for no other reason than I need to buy paint." Of course, it wasn't $10 a night, but people could actually come and stay in the bedroom. It's quite neat. And here's some pictures of it. So this is an actual bedroom that people could rent and stay in. And it was designed to look just like the painting by Vincent van Gogh. The bedroom, the actual painting, was painted in the Yellow House in the French countryside, where Paul Gauguin and Vincent van Gogh stayed. This is one of my favorite pictures. I just love the way that these objects look. Now, I think in 2018, a movie about Vincent van Gogh came out called Loving Vincent. And it was fully painted film. So it took 100 artists, 65,000 paintings. Each frame of the movie was painted with oil paints. Each frame, means each second of that film was painted. If you ever get a chance to see it, it's a great film. In 2018 or 19, I think it was 18, Vans, the shoe company Vans, collaborated with the Van Gogh Museum, and they wanted to create a collection of Van Gogh's work put on shoes. They wanted a new audience to see his work outside of the museum walls. So they created shoes, backpacks, jackets, all kinds of different accessories, all based on Van Gogh. And the ones that are on the screen right now were based off of the painting and then a letter to his brother Theo. I believe this painting is called Cherry Blossoms, and they created shoes, a backpack, and a jacket, all based on this painting. A portrait of Van Gogh. I loved this one. But this one was my all-time favorite. And I could kick myself because I knew about this collaboration, and I even looked at the shoes when they first came out, and I should have purchased them. But I waited a few days, and when I went back to buy these shoes, they were sold out. Now you can still find them on eBay, but people are asking outrageous amounts of money for them, $300, $400, and I refuse to do that. But what I do love about these shoes is if you look inside the soles of them, you can see these little tiny white marks, and they are really to represent the brush strokes that Van Gogh used. They're on each pair of the soles. You can kind of see them. Now again, this is Van Gogh's most famous painting, the Starry Night, painted in 1889. And that's why I think you've probably seen this throughout your life. You might not have known that it was Vincent van Gogh's, but you have seen this painting. And it's been parodied so many times, and that's what I'm going to have fun with you right now, is we're going to show you some parodies or imitations of the artist. Again, a parody is an imitation of the style of a particular writer or an artist or a genre, with deliberate exaggeration for comic effect. So here you have Godzilla, who has been put in the Starry Night. You can see that the little village below is on fire. Pac-Man, added into the Starry Night sky. And of course you have the actual Pac-Man as the sun, the little ghosts as the swirl. Star Wars. Who doesn't love Nightmare Before Christmas? Hogwarts. Lord of the Rings. Batman. King Kong. I believe this is Minecraft. I might be wrong. Or Pixelated. Some of you are probably yelling at me right now. I got that wrong. This one is the most recent one I've seen. Stranger Things. I love Stranger Things. I'm a big Dustin fan. Doctor Who, the TARDIS. Now you've seen this painting, again, several times, but have you actually seen the real one? It's located in New York City at the MoMA, and it's quite small. It's much smaller than you would maybe think. In fact, the painting that I was sitting with in the very beginning of the video is much larger than the actual piece. So here is the Starry Night. There is an article that I'd like you to read. It discusses Van Gogh and his use of all 7 elements of art. Please read the article and look at this painting.